Hello and welcome to another episode of the SENDhelp podcast. And today we have got returning guest. We've got Vickki with us. And I know that you've already kind of seen bits of Vickki and really liked bits of Vickki because she's like, I'd say, well, God knows by the time this gets out, but she's already going viral at the moment. So yeah, I think it was only the right thing to do to get you back on anyway. And also we had some technical issues with the fall. So the fall won't be out for that one, unfortunately. So you probably realize that by the time this comes out. But yeah. So since we last spoke, I mean, I think you said you've done a bit of limited company and stuff, but I just wanted you to go back and just for everyone that hasn't heard anything about what it is you're doing and what your company is and kind of bit your background and just briefly as much as you want to share.
Oh, my background, goodness me. I am an ex-SEND TA. I have been an international level massage therapist with various sports organisations. My background is biochemistry and physiology at uni, and I specialised in neurology and neurobiochemistry at the time because my dad had Alzheimer's, and I had no understanding of neurodivergence at that point, apart from knowing that I was dyslexic. And it was only when I turned 53 and menopause caused the wheels to come off that I realised that I was as autistic as my own daughter.
How did that feel at that time?
The actual assessment process was very bizarre because I must have done every single online test. If this isn't a sign of autism, I don't know what is. To see, was I wasting somebody's time before I actually went for the test? And I was desperately trying to understand why I was doing the things that I was doing, if that makes any sense. And yeah, the whole process was weird. Doing the ADOS and having to make up a story from a book with some frogs and just thinking, what is this? I'm not 5. I'm 53 at the time. I'm a lot older than that now. And my brain was just like, okay, just play the game. Whatever the game is, I'm not sure what the game is, but I'm going to play what I think it is. And and then I had the psychiatrist's appointment in the afternoon, having done the ADOS in the morning. And the psychiatrist was interesting, shall we say. And the night before, my sister had told me in one of those lovely texts that you get and then you sit up all night stressing over it. Whatever I say in your assessment tomorrow, don't worry about it. Which then led to me instantly going, what are you talking about? Yeah. And she said, oh, your mother and I thought you were brain damaged when you were younger because you didn't speak till you were 7. And I went, excuse me? And I had no recollection at all. As far as the world is concerned, I've got degrees, I've had successful careers. I didn't consider myself autistic, although I could identify with a lot of the traits. I don't think I was quite prepared until I was 53 to actually sort of say, yes, this is me and this is where I'm going. But the assessment itself, the last afternoon drained me. My social battery was so low, I went to bed for a week.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
And I literally just wanted to live with the duvet over my head. And then when I'd had a chance to sort of recover, I thought, this woman isn't going to diagnose me, and I know I am now.
Yeah.
And so I wrote something like, what was it? 100-point bullet point list of reasons why I thought I was autistic. Again, no, this doesn't indicate that I'm autistic at all.
Yeah.
It's not like I've done the research or anything. And eventually it came back and she spoke to me and she said, well, I originally thought maybe it was complex PTSD or autism. And I turned around and said, well, can it not be both? Because I personally believe if I wasn't autistic, then my reactions to things that have happened during my life would have meant I probably wouldn't have ended up with complex PTSD. And I don't think she was prepared for somebody to ask that question. And in the end, she said, well, we've just decided you're autistic anyway.
That's mad. I've literally just did a podcast as well with someone with mental health was explaining that exact problem about trauma is always never mixed in with the autism and stuff like that. Like, if you had a trauma-informed approach with everybody, you'd kind of solve all these issues and it's all entwined with stuff like that, isn't it? And it gets missed and it's either one or the other, not both. Like, see, it's so hard to identify symptoms from each one and they overlap so much that you end up sometimes getting stuck in the middle of, like you just said, of being one or the other instead of it being looked at as both.
Well, that's a really interesting point because Jane Green, who I was talking to you about earlier, her charity, the SEDS Collective, have actually just recently published a paper and I'm going to read it out because it's in the British Journal of Psychology. Oh, no, Psychiatry, sorry. And it was published this year. And it's called The Elephant in the Room, Neurodivergence in Psychiatry. And the whole paper is about how psychiatry hasn't really understood the impact of neurodivergence on mental health. From my personal experience and watching my daughter going through CAMS, they talk about anxiety, depression, social anxiety. These are all things that are an outcome from neurodivergence. So if a medical person isn't trained to understand what neurodivergence is and how it impacts people, particularly their nervous system, then how do we know that they are actually understanding us? And, people bandy about this phrase of being neuroaffirming, but no one's actually defined what that means.
Yeah.
And people may well assume that they're being terribly affirming, but actually it can be quite the opposite. And that comes back to what I was saying before in the previous podcast about the sort of systemic ableism, where it's so systemic that you can't see it.
Yeah.
Because it's just so in your face, it's too close to your face for you to see until you can pull back and have a look. And that, I think, is one of the hardest things when you're going through the process of being evaluated for neurodivergence, or if you're trying to recover from trauma that's occurred during that process, before that process, or even after that process.
Yeah, it'd be like a recent history. It would be when like the learning disabilities, but all people were all locked up in asylums and stuff. And at the time, everyone would say that was the best thing and that was what it was. And now you look back at it, you're like, wow, that was bad. But that went on years.
1920s, they were still doing lobotomies
Yeah,
to control people. Rather than actually understanding what was going on in that person's world and not the people around them's world, they're just like, oh, well, we just need you to be compliant, so we'll just stick a pole in your head and rummage around a bit in your frontal cortex, and then you'll be nice and compliant and pleasant, and then we don't have to do anything with you.
it's kind of haven't moved away from that very much, have we? If you hear like kind of what it's like in schools now for that kind of, it's more segregation, isn't it? It's like we ain't got the time to kind of help you, so we're just going to put you in a corner and leave you to kind of get on with it yourself. As long as you attend, it's not going to cause a problem to us. Like if you're segregated, if you're in the classroom, it's causing a problem because you're affecting everyone's grades.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest problems we have in the classroom at the moment is probably that we have too many children for one teacher.
Yeah.
I mean, the ideal would be to drop the class sizes in half and have 15 pupils, or maybe not 15 because an odd number's weird, but to have an even number, between 10 and 16 or something like that, where people can sit next to somebody, they have the opportunity to really interact with the teacher without all the accompanying noise and stimulation that comes with a large class of pupils or students. Because there's so much noise, there's so much stimulation, there's so many things to look at, that how does somebody who can't filter enough to be able to actually concentrate on the work that's put in front of them?
Yeah, and I would argue that that would be beneficial for everybody as well. Every kid would benefit from that. And if we're talking about the COVID generation as well, that it kind of is nuts to think that even as adults we avoid a classroom of 30. We wouldn't go sit with 30 people in a room, every day. Like, do you know what I mean? We wouldn't want to do it even as a work thing. You don't sit around the same people. Like, it's a very big ask. And then for the teacher to teach that many people to a certain standard is kind of setting them up to fail, I think.
I think the problem is, from my point of view, is a teacher cannot differentiate for 30 different people.
No,
It
you
would
have to
be
see
impossible in a
someone
class
yeah.
of 30 to differentiate. And that's no disrespect to the teachers out there, so please don't think I'm disrespecting them. But then you've also got TAs that are either trying to be a one-to-one, but they're also being pulled into being a classroom TA at the same time when they should be just a one-to-one. So the person they're one-to-oneing is losing out because they're not getting the attention. The class is losing out because they're not getting the attention. And the teacher is getting the flack from absolutely everybody.
Why is teaching assistants as a role in the class? You'd think that why wouldn't they up? Is there, obviously you as a teaching assistant, what's the issue there about jobs? Like, why is there such a sort of shortage, do you think, of TAs?
I would probably say that it's salary.
Okay.
I think to be on what is effectively minimum wage and you're only paid for part of the year, whereas teachers are paid for a full year, even though they don't work in the holidays. Teaching's changed very much from when my mum was a teacher. When I was growing up, my mum every night was working till 10 o'clock at night, marking books, doing things, getting lessons prepped. And that's not to say teachers aren't doing that now, but the schools that I've worked in, it was much more about you tried to do everything within the school day.
Yeah.
I don't think it's possible, but and then there was the unwritten rule of you need to be in work half an hour early so that you're ready to go when the bell rings. Well, that's great, but I'm not being paid for that. So you're getting 30 minutes extra of my time. You never, ever finish when the bell goes. So then you're getting another 15 minutes. That's 45 minutes a day, 5 days a week for the whole of the school year. So that's 180 days.
Yeah.
And that's unpaid work. Then there's the, if you get invited to go on a school trip, that's not paid either. Do you see what I mean? They are very much...
Well, undervalued, it sounds like.
Yes.
Yeah, massively. Because I'd say as times have changed, a TA's role could be as important, if not more, depending on the SEND needs of the class, than the teacher. If their job is to keep the SEND children on the same page, or that's a enormous task to keep them, like, to keep the kids in the class but separate from the other kids, like, so they're not affecting it. That in itself is something the teacher, as you said, can't do on their own. So
No.
they need PA. So it should be more of a neutral pay. And again, but that will come. It's about these stupid qualifications, isn't it? And like, it's about, it'll be because they've gone to uni and they get the uni money kind of thing because of the qualification and stuff. But the job roles change so much. I would say that really needs to be looked at, because TA would be, especially for SEND parents, could be the most important person that you come in contact with in that school. You're one-to-one.
Very much so. One of the children that I TA'd as a one-to-one needed a tremendous amount of support. When I took over working with her, she had been parked in front of a computer for most of the day, just pressing buttons. And somebody just checking in every so often to say, do you understand it? And I actually sat down with her and went, are you bored? And she went, yes. I said, have you learnt anything? She goes, and I said, right. So I then went to her class teachers and said, I want to try and bring her back into the classroom. And the poor kid was so conditioned to sitting at the computer that the thought of going back into a maths lesson was terrifying. And I said, well, look, what we'll do is we're just going to go in and sit at the back. I'm not going to expect you to do anything, but I'd like you to experience what a real classroom is like. And we ended up with her being not in the bottom set of maths at all. And, she did pass some of her GCSEs. And considering that she was dealing with a lot on her plate at the time, particularly with sort of medical conditions and things, she did phenomenally well, But it was that, she couldn't take part in PE because she had various disabilities that meant that wouldn't be a safe environment for her. So I would go, right, well, if they're going to go and do athletics around the pitch, I'll go and get a foam ball and we'll play football on just one-on-one. And I had to teach her how to throw and catch. And we literally started about 1.5 feet apart from each other, and me handing her the ball and then her handing it back to me. And then it was like a little throw, or me dropping it into her hands. And then eventually we got to about 20 feet away. And just seeing that confidence and looking at how she moved and the development of her proprioception as she was walking and moving to get the ball, bend over, pick it up, throw it back. All these things that she just hadn't been challenged.
Yeah. And that's what I mean. How many of these kids now are in schools that have got the ability, they just need that one-to-one line or just a little bit of time spent with them to enable them to get to say. And it's kind of baffling, isn't it? Because as you said, some of them could actually do the grades, and it's almost like they're written off when they've got that SEND need that they could even get the grades, isn't it? Like, it's just, and it's not that they can't get the grades, it's the fact that they can't learn in that environment. And there's a massive difference to that, isn't it? In the right environment, I do argue that most of these kids would be the same performers as everyone else in the class if they got the right support in schools.
Yeah, I think the problem is that, I'll be brutally honest here, I think there is a need for a middle type of school. So you have what I would call your typical neurotypical school. Then you have, at the other end of the spectrum, you've got a SEND school. But there needs to be somewhere in between, for where the kids are not bad enough to go into a special school. And when I mean bad, I mean that their needs are that complex that it's required for placement in a SEND school. But they need a quieter environment, more not understanding, more knowledge about what their needs are, because, and it is improving with time. A lot of teachers have a long way to go in understanding neurodivergence.
Mhm.
And also understanding the comorbidities that go with that neurodivergence. I was chatting to a young person yesterday, and we were talking about hypermobility. And as we were talking, I'd been clocking various behavioural things that were just ticking off in the back of my head as we were chatting. And I said, you mentioned you were dyslexic. I said, I noticed that you're struggling conversing with me, and you don't like eye contact and this, that, and the other. I said, have you ever looked at neurodivergence other than dyslexia? And the mum turned around and went, yeah, I think I'm ADHD. And I said, well, ADHD and hypermobility go hand in hand, as does autism. And so if we were looking at people as a whole, rather than you're just a body at a desk that has to sit and learn and repeat, we should be encouraging the desire and the curiosity to learn, rather than enforcing a prison-like feeling in a classroom.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's hard enough for them to kind of understand it singly, let alone having, as you said, about having different diagnoses that are linked to each other, especially the ADHD and dyslexia present very similar. And it's almost like they choose one or the other than do both, or entertain the possibility they could be both, or try to spend the time to work out which one it is. It's like they just have to guess. Same with, it's only, they still put ADHD and autism together. They don't understand that that means it's a complete different diagnosis. They
Yes.
can't read it like it's ADHD and autism, and you've got all the ADHD traits and all the, no, it works differently. It can't work the same. And that's something that's going to come along, hopefully in a few years to come. But that's a completely separate diagnosis that they're getting wrong completely off the back, because they're trying to treat it as two separate things instead of, again, person-centered to that child and what that means to that person.
I was reading a paper last night, actually, where they've been taking functional MRIs of people with ADHD and people who are classically neurotypical. And there is functional differences within the brain structure and the signaling pathways between the two. So this misconception, particularly that the press are pushing about it's just a mental thing and you're just making it up and all the rest of it, is completely untrue.
Yeah.
And it's by pushing this sort of propaganda of you're just a bit weak, or you're a bit soft, or you're not tough enough, you're not resilient, it means that people's self-esteem is being ruined.
Massively.
And then
Constantly.
because of that, then their expectations of what they can achieve for themselves goes downhill.
Mhm.
And then it becomes a slippery slope. And along with that comes then all the comorbidities of depression and all the rest of it. There was another paper that I read that was talking about anxiety amongst autistics as being distinct from social anxiety and other forms of anxiety like general anxiety disorder.
Yeah.
And so it's a level of anxiety that comes from the neural arousal within the nervous system of the person who's living with it or in it. And so when you're dealing with a nervous system that is already, say if neurotypical people were here, their nervous system arousal and their threat and fight, flight, freeze or fawn response is already up here. It's no wonder that then they start to react at things that would not bother a neurotypical.
I could say that for ADHD is almost like anxiety is very hard to pinpoint because it really runs into, especially if I said I had no tablets, I'd be like, it's almost like blood boiling, and it's almost like you're right, your anxiety level's already above. And I think if you look at how they say ADHD was built for like the hunter gatherers and stuff like that, and it had a use to be like that hyper alert, and it just doesn't have that use now, which would then cause anxiety, because if there's no use to be at that top alertness all the time, everything's still in, it then leads into anxiety, goes into other stuff. And I think I think that's very good that they've differentiated it, because I always also think autism anxiety is also misunderstood with the element of the control. So the more anxious the person is, the more control, which would mean the more autistic they appear. So a lot of the OCD rituals and all of this stuff is actually anxiety, and it's not autism. And when you deal with anxiety, they won't feel the need to do that. And it's very hard because they work so much together that the more anxious you get, I know this is because of me, and I get really weird about things like, so I'll start doing things like I can only play one game at a time. I can't play two games on the Xbox, like not at the same time, obviously, but like in the same week. I have to finish one and then I know that that's my trigger sign to say something's wrong. I'm anxious because I'm trying to control the narrative. And I think these kids that get left for so long out of school, that are controlling the household, and it's getting put down to autism when it's not. It's really extreme anxiety, yes, but that's different to what a normal person would experience because of the autism. But it's still the anxiety based of it.
Yeah. I do think that neurodevelopmental conditions, we've still got so far to go to understand what makes that different to a neurotypical. One of my biggest questions is always, what is neurotypical?
I don't think it's a myth, I think.
Because it's not really defined.
It's almost like saying
be...
you haven't reported anything, isn't it? It's the people that haven't gone to the doctors and reported that anything's wrong are neurotypical.
Yeah, very much so. And yet when you actually talk to people, you find out I can walk into a room and I can probably, without even realizing it, it's the neurodivergence radar. And I will immediately hone in on the people who are neurodivergent. Not that I know that they are, but there will be something about their body language, the way they talk, the body posture, all sorts of little tiny things that you wouldn't notice if you just looked for one thing, but it becomes that typical thing everyone talks about in autism of pattern recognition. And it's a subconscious process. And you look at that and then you go, I'm going to talk to that person. And they're normally very grateful that somebody's gone to speak to them because they're feeling very awkward. Sometimes not even as awkward as I feel, but I'm just sitting there like scanning the room going, who do I think, who looks like I could possibly talk to them? And they're not just going to go, I'm 55 and I'm still learning to take turns in talking.
It's like, and that's another thing, isn't it? It never ends. I don't think the learning ever ends. And I think even with the outside perspective of learning about it and not being advanced, even our understanding of people that have got it isn't always complete, because you are always learning, and it changes with environment, with your age, with how much you're going to go, like how much has happened to you in your life or how much is happening at the moment of your life. And it kind of just fluctuates, doesn't it, through your life? New things pop up, some things disappear. So that's why it's hard to put it down to something like one condition or one thing, because I think there's such pulling effect of all of these things. And that's why there's so many overlap in all of these things, because people don't. And I think when I was speaking to that lady earlier, and it's almost like if people misunderstand the trauma that just having a diagnosis and being neurodivergent causes. So on its own, if you understood that, you'd understand you need to treat both.
Yes.
But people are really trying to put things into categories, and it seems like, oh, ADHD is this, and it means this, and it means that. And it goes back to neurotypical, doesn't it? That neurotypical literally is people that just haven't tried to step outside that box of there's anything wrong or I need to question it. And it's almost like, if you look at that further back, it's like, so the people that are compliant enough to not moan about or try and ask for support are the ones you're saying are normal, giving that gratification of saying, you're normal. And anyone that's asked for support or said, so struggling, gets put in one of your boxes that you can then say, they're this, they're that.
But then you see, the world wouldn't change without neurodivergent people coming along and going, that's not right. Yeah. That doesn't work. I've got a better system. Because invariably, we've worked out what works for us. So, for instance, when my daughter was a lot younger, sort of 5, 6, 7, it was like having a feral cat in the house sometimes. She'd be running around all the time, climbing things, jumping off the sofa, sitting on her head, watching the TV with her legs in the air. And people would come around the house and be like, why do you let her do that? And I said, is she hurting anyone? Is her behaviour actually harming anyone? And they were like, no. I said, so the only thing that's actually irking you is the fact that I'm allowing my child to be themselves. If it got to a point where she was climbing over, say, a visitor, then obviously I would intervene and that sort of thing. But what I knew from obviously being with my daughter from since before she was born is that she needed to have work of some sort, physicality, movement. Now that comes from being under aroused at a neurological level within your nervous system and particularly the brain. So that need to move is their coping mechanism in order to boost the neural arousal so that they are at the same level as all the neurotypical people around them.
See, I never do that. I shake my leg all the time. Makes perfect sense.
Yep.
I just thought that was just part of ADHD, but now you've explained it. That makes perfect sense. It's regulation, isn't it? I've
It,
heard that before, but your explanation makes sense. Yeah.
so it's, if somebody is hyper, then you've got to think for that particular thing that they're doing in relation to that, they must be too low. So they're trying to raise up to come to the baseline. Whereas
And
if they are already way above that, then they're going to look at reducing their neural arousal down into the baseline area. So they will then be trying to be very calm, very quiet, off into corners. Because the moment something frightens them, for instance, as an example,
Mm.
Moro reflex, you're going to look to go and sit somewhere quiet so you can calm down. So that means you're already up here, and your natural response to that is, I need somewhere quiet so that I can calm down and self-regulate. All these behaviours that we see is about regulation without us understanding what the need for regulation is. So we're all looking for this sort of comfortable in the zone feeling, aren't we? And when you're in the zone, do you feel anxiety?
well, no.
No. Are you productive?
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you focused? 100%. So
Well,
this is why we see a lot of this disruption in classrooms, is because people are finding that something is either too difficult, they don't understand, or they are looking for some kind of self-regulation in order to be in that space. And that doesn't mean to say that kids think, this is a boring lesson, I don't want to be in here. Everybody has that. I don't think, me and French, for instance,
Mm.
I am the world's worst person at languages, but I can mimic the sound really well. If you sat and asked me to speak to you in French, we'd probably be here for an hour before I could get one sentence out. And I'd probably be sat there on Google trying to work out what it was that I should be saying.
You could argue with that logic. So, when you see a kid, especially in the classroom environment, that is moving around a lot and dysregulating, then should instantly know that it's either too hard or it's not entertaining them enough, so they're finding it boring. In relation to that, when someone hyper focuses with ADHD, they do sit still and they don't regulate their behavior, that's mad, because it makes so much sense to sort of, when you're doing a task that's not stimulating you enough, like the extra exciting things, you're under, so you have to use that for your body. And if you're doing something that's already doing that, so you're hyper focused, something you really love, your body doesn't need to do that because it's got enough dopamine and stuff already going through it.
Exactly.
That's
But
really
then you
interesting.
see, what floats your boat to do one thing might not float mine.
Mm.
And that's where the problem for teachers comes from, is that trying to differentiate means you're trying to entertain 30 children with 30 different points of view.
Yeah.
That's like setting someone up to fail, really.
It's in locked subjects that you can't kind of go out of or explore into different realms, like very locked in. Even like, I remember in history, it was a nightmare because I love history now. And it's like, that's like my autism quirk. Like, I love history. But I wouldn't have thought that going into secondary school because of the test and because I got what I learned was just rubbish. Like, and it's like I would have thrived if they'd done certain subjects in it, and I would have been able to get A stars. But they're so limited in what the what they're meant to do, like the curriculum.
Yeah.
So like English with the Macbeth and Shakespeare still, that might probably do something more relevant. Like, do you know what I mean? That
I'm actually with you on that one because I really don't understand English grammar. I use it
I don't understand it at all.
intuitively, I guess, but my daughter's completely different. If we go to watch a movie, she will pull apart everything, from the cinematic use of a wide angle lens. And I'm just like, I don't care. I just enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And she's like, yes, but did you understand the symbolism of this, that, and the other? My face is like, what on earth are you talking about? That's neither here nor there for me, but for her, that becomes really fascinating. Yet if you were to talk about something scientific, oh man, I'm there. I'm I want to hear everything. I want to understand it. I want to get right down to nitty gritty. Let's talk about quarks, rather
Yeah.
than I don't know what an iambic pentameter is. I've been told it 1,000 times, having sat in a classroom, but even now at 55, have I needed that information? No. But there will be other people for who that is that zone area for them.
And it's taboo English language as well, because I hate English, but it's still tabooed in society. Like, what I mean by that is that people still get kind of offended that people make spelling mistakes or care about punctuation because it's meant to be normal. You're meant to learn how to read or write. And that's the problem with dyslexia, that very instantly having that, you don't appear normal and you can't catch up to your peers. So that's the bare basics. What do you mean you can't spell properly or you can't do this? And people are still attacking that like it's such a requirement when we've got auto text, autocorrect, and everything's done digitally now. And you can check or Google if you need to try it. Like, it's so outdated and people's actions to it. I get pulled up all the time. Not even a spelling mistake, it'd be like the wrong use, like R and R. And it's like, you've gone out, like the whole video and that's what you've taken for it. And you've just written, it's actually R. But it really offends people. It's the only way I can describe it. Like, people don't let people live with that mistake. That really gets to people, but it's almost a reinforce with them. Like, no, you need to get it correct.
I think it's what tends to happen in a situation like that is somebody's looking for a reason to be judgmental. And so the only way they can do that is to go, oh, look, you made a spelling mistake there and your grammar's wrong.
Yeah.
Because that's a way that they can feel superior.
Without, yeah, it's basically, you're right, but I'm not going to say that, but you spelled it wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean I don't do that myself every so often, because I do.
Oh, yeah.
It is a human thing, after all, to judge. If we didn't judge, we wouldn't change things.
No, it's
so
true.
there is a need for it.
That's what I said about everything. It's opposites for everything, is it? And there's a need for everything. Like, everyone says about suffering and people dying early. And yes, it sucks, but you wouldn't be grateful for your life if they didn't. So, like, if you didn't have the pain, the suffering, and the depression and stuff like that, what would you aim for? What would you try to get out of? You would have a very mundane, flat life if that was all taken away.
Very much so. And the other side of it is, without pain, there is no push to change anything. So if you look at the way society was, however many gazillions of years ago, it was very different to how it is now. We have far more rules, regulations, laws, and things in place to ensure that there is fairness. I say that slightly tongue-in-cheek, because we all know that the law is a law unto itself. And, we struggle as human beings sometimes to put ourselves in other people's shoes, because the need to be right is greater than the need to understand someone else. That's not always how it is, but that is quite a strong thing.
I think it comes back to the crippling self-esteem, where, isn't it? Like, that kind of needs not. I think that comes from having to prove yourself, isn't it? Other than, and it'd be like, because I always find it hard, like, counsellors just sit there and I'd want to interject, be like, no, you're just doing this wrong, and then stuff like that. But that's because I kind of want to prove my use. And if you're confident in your ability, you could sit back there and lightly judge and know that they're going to come back and know that it's all about confidence, that sort of thing as well, isn't it? And it comes back to how society makes your self-esteem so shot away that you do end up coming into your own head, and you do accidentally then put yourself in front of other people and other situations, like what people say about Sen kids openly on thingy, and they think they're so justified in attacking Sen kids, and it's the best thing to do because, our kids have rights too, but it's not meaning what you're actually saying. Like, you're saying something, but you're meaning something really horrible and sinister.
Yeah. And the beauty of all of this is, without neurodivergence, we wouldn't have all of the things that we have today. Because without scientists, and I will die on this hill, without neurodivergence within scientists, there would be no inventions. People just gone, I can cope with that. As they're pushing a rock up a hill or something, rather than
Yeah.
going, oh, if I put a log underneath it, I could roll it up. It's that.
Yeah, that person with ADHD is like, I'm not doing that. You're joking. I'm doing this every day. There's got to be an easier way.
Yeah.
And then just defies it and just pushes it again. Yeah. Or that person with autism that thinks logically and thinks, actually, we could do this, or it is. And do you know what I like to say? My theory about this is that it's evolution, and it's evolution that's caught up. So very much a spare between, and it felt like the people that had it there through generations. And because it goes generational, there is more than we ever would expect. So as much as we say that there's only like, I don't know, 5% of the world diagnosed, I think it's more like 50. And it's, if you think about how the government and society has put us into this thing about how we are rigid in rules and we don't question anything and we just pay taxes and do all of this stuff, the only thing to break that would be neurodiversity, and a lot of it, because you couldn't conform mainstream people to a certain type. So you couldn't have normal people because no one would be normal. So they're people outside the box. And I think that makes them frightened of why they put so much restrictions in schools about going outside the curriculum, because they can't fathom having a kid at 10 running a business or knowing more than a coder that's gone through university, because it will tell everyone that life's a lie.
Yeah. 25% of the UK population is registered disabled. Like, current estimates are 15 to 20% of the population are neurodivergent. Obviously, there will be overlap.
I think it's more. I like to say we're 75% of the way there. And people that are staying on that hill saying, no, not me, are the most autistic ones yet, because they won't change anything and can't fathom the fact that it impacts them. So like teachers that have done the same lesson plan for 16 years and are now refusing to change it because he's autistic. I'm not changing if he's autistic. Kids, why should I have to change? You're like, you can't change. That's the problem. You're autistic. Like, do you know what I mean?
But the reason they can't change it is because they can't see the logic in why would they need to change, because the subject matter hasn't changed.
And doesn't that sound very autistic?
It does. Because you've got to have this is the biggest thing, I think. You have to understand why a rule is in place in order to take part in following it. Because, you could have a rule that somebody says, when you get to 20, you walk up to a cliff and you jump off it. That could be a rule. You might be 19 and a half, autistic, for instance, walk up to that cliff just to have a look and go, I'm not jumping off that. Why would I do that? I'm going to break my legs. But everyone goes, yes, but that's what we do at 20. On our 20th birthday, we're going to walk up that hill and jump off that cliff. But why? Oh, that's because we're told to. And that's
the danger. And that's what I mean. That's why I like to say it's evolution, because the only thing to break that kind of compliance and that blind just jumping off the thing would be having a population of neurodiverse. Because what would the government do if 95% ratio of neurodiverse? Well, actually, it would thrive, because the people in charge would be neurodiverse too. And that's no, they won't. That'd be the 5% still running the country, hiding behind the walls, making sure we get nowhere near them.
Yeah. But coming back to what I was saying earlier, they say 1% of the UK population is autistic, that's diagnosed. It's really interesting to see how people play with the figures, because if you look at different sources, they say it's between 700,000 and 1 million people are diagnosed with autism. You then got something like 4.5, 5 million are ADHD. Then you will have a crossover of, I think it's 30, I might have these figures wrong, but 30% of ADHDers have autism as well, and 70% of autistics have ADHD.
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah. So you've got this. There's at least 5 million autistics and ADHDers running around. Add into that it's highly genetic, then you're looking at least one parent, and normally two, because let's face it, it's normally neurodivergents will hang out with each other.
Yeah.
As we discussed before, because your communication style is similar, so you will understand each other. Whereas if you've got a neurotypical and a neurodivergent, tends to be, you probably end up feeling like you're constantly at war.
Yeah.
Because one person says something and it's taken a completely different way from maybe the way it was meant, or maybe not, who knows. But, so that's, let's just say 5 million ADHDers and autistics. Then you've got their parents. Well, at least one of those is going to be ADHD or autistic. And just because they had it beaten out at them when they were my age doesn't mean that they haven't masked for Britain for the whole of their adult life in order to not look neurodivergent. And then you add in Tourette's, dyslexia, dyscalculia, and everything else, developmental coordination disorder, which is DCD, or what used to be dyspraxia, and every other OCD. Now, all of these, you're probably looking at a good 30 to 40, maybe even 50% of the population, as you were saying, are neurodivergent. But most of us have had it. No, you have to mask. You've got to camouflage that awful part of yourself because you have to fit in. You have to be into that norm category because if you don't, you won't get on in life. What we tend to find then, if you look amongst, say, entrepreneurs, a lot of them are ADHD or autistic or have another form of neurodivergence because the neurotypical way of working doesn't work for them. So they've had to find a way to earn money to run their life the way they want to do it. Those are the people who end up bucking the trend and doing something completely amazing because they've seen a niche, they've seen a need and they've gone, I can fix that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's important. I think it's hard to, when you put it down like that, isn't it? It's hard to see whether we're in an actual crisis or a war. And that's uncomfortable to think, isn't it? Because is it actually like we're seeing an attack on Sen kids and putting Sen kids, trying to disable Sen kids, and deliberate tactic for parents to not get a diagnosis, making it, because everything's connected. It's so hard to get a diagnosis now. They're not ignoring the need. The kids are getting pushed into mainstream more and more. It's almost like it's almost like it's manufactured to break SEN parents. And even from the beginning, from the get-go, from even just thinking, my kid's got this wrong, can you help me? The 3 to 4 years to 5 years that takes for the school to even acknowledge it, you're broken. And it's like, they're not stupid. They're running the country. They know what they're doing.
I think that one of the biggest problems we have is neurodivergence comes under the concept of mental health rather than physical health.
Yes.
And so it's used, and the concept of resilience is used as a way to beat people. Oh, you're not resilient enough because you're really, really sensitive. Oh, you're too soft.
Symptoms can get better. You can control them. Yeah.
And so let me teach you this coping mechanism, which is actually a form of masking in order for you to not bother me so much so that I don't have to deal with your neurodivergence. So that then that's what's going on in my view.
It's being part of the society, isn't it? But it's not really. It's saying don't be neurodivergent.
We've had strategies, since 2009 in the UK, particularly for autism in both the adult and children's pathways, and yet nothing seems to have moved forward.
Well, if anything, we're going back. We're doing stuff that we've already done again.
Yep. And I think one of the biggest mistakes we have made is that when we're dealing with the side effects of neurodivergence, i.e. mental health issues, particularly for the children under 18, you're looking at a mental health service that has no commissioning for neurodivergence. So if you take your child to CAMS, they may well agree to assess them, but then there's no support after that. And then when you talk to them, you say, well, why aren't you supporting my child because they've got this and they've got that? We're not commissioned to help with autism or ADHD. And that's nationwide.
Trained as well, isn't it? It's never crossed over in the services like it is in real life.
And it comes back to what I said at the beginning of this podcast, was this neuroaffirming concept it's very ableist to think you're neuroaffirming when you haven't got a clue.
And that's kind of insulting, isn't it? Do you know what the way that I can relate to that is I made this mistake of trying to say that you understood a woman's domestic abuse and what the dangers are. It's like, as much as I try to say stuff like, oh, yeah, we're not one of the ones stuff for that. And yeah, but then you end up saying stuff like, yeah, but what about guys? And you're like, okay, well, 95% of the statistics weighing up women. So you're taking it away from the problem already by saying that statement. And you think at the time you're being good. You're like, yeah, we'll bring awareness for everybody and doing this, but you're missing you're missing the main piece. And it's like, you can't speak on that experience unless you are a woman that's gone through domestic abuse, and it's almost like I can guess and sympathise, but I will never understand. And the fact that the more understanding I try to make myself, that everyone thought, oh look, I can understand, because it made it worse. Because then you're always triggering someone else. You know what I mean? So you're better just to understand and listen in them situations and take lead from the people that have gone through it.
Very much so. And I think what we actually need is more neurodivergent people in medicine, in psychiatry, in psychology, in research. Because if I want to study what it's like to be a man, I can only ever experience that from the outside.
Mhm.
I can't experience that from being a man because I'm not one. You know, I could put on a fake beard, I could bind my breasts, I could cut my hair short, I could talk with a lower voice, but that fundamental internal experience I will never have.
Mm.
How can I then turn around to you and say, your experience is wrong, you should be doing this? And the voices of neurodivergence needs to be louder and louder and louder until we cannot be ignored.
Yeah,
And hear
absolutely.
that, Bridget Phillipson.
So, yeah, I think, and this is the point. I think that we're getting to that point. We are getting, as I'd say, even the last 6 months, a lot louder. That comes with its own issues about what you're directing and what you're asking for, though. But the fact that the people are getting a lot louder and taking the power back, and you're seeing people unite under banners, doing these marches, going to these places, these companies popping up. I think the turn is happening slowly.
I mean,
How much? I don't know.
I went to London in September last year from all the way up north to go to the demonstration outside Parliament.
Mm.
And there was myself and another lady who is from a bit further south from me. And funny how we gravitated towards each other on the tube before we even got there. And, you know, instead of always telling us we've got it wrong, would it really do so much harm to actually listen to what we've got to say? Because one of the old adages I hear all the time is what works for neurodivergence works just as well for neurotypical, if not better. So if we're
Mm.
looking at ways to change how we teach, how we do healthcare, surely if understand the neurodivergent point of view, then we raise the standard across the board
Yeah.
rather than dragging us all down to the lowest common denominator.
It is baffling. It has to be led by it. It has to be. There's certain things about the future getting better for Sen kids that where we need to have that voice. And if we don't have that voice, we're never going to get out of it. And it's going to cause more and more kids to be self-harming, out of school, all this crisis. Then people not even turning up to school in like the next generation. They're like, I'm not sending my kid to school. Why would I do that? It was hell for me. And you've got the deficit of jobs. You've got all of this. Like there's so many factors that are all around it, isn't it? And it all starts with being heard and listened to, and people actually was not just being listened to, but people are trying to action from the listen. So it's all right giving us a voice and letting us rant in a corner somewhere, but you need to be listening to what we're saying. Like you can't just go, oh, we're allowed to let them speak up now. You know, they've got their little platforms and they can just rant all they want. You need to actually like come halfway and meet us in the same room.
Are you possibly talking about the same consultation for the white paper that we just sat there and listened to how the government were patting themselves on the back all the way through? But
Yeah.
actually, when it came to answering the difficult questions, they were beautifully skated over.
Yeah.
It was like, oh no, we'll just paper over that crack. We're not going to answer that question because that's far too politically awkward for us.
And I know my biggest thing about this, why I won't go into politics, is because the way I describe stuff, because it's war and blah, blah, blah. And if they're expecting, this is where the goes wrong, isn't it? Because they alienate parents and people like that would be saying it because they're not professional. And
Yep.
it's like, this is where you need to stop with that professional thing about it, because there is no professionals. The professionals are the people living it every day. You don't get a professional ADHD, a professional autism. Like you don't. It's just people that have that experience that you have to learn from. And I
Yep.
think the more it goes up, and as I said, for MPs looking down, it has to come. They're very selective about what questions and who they're looking at for. So if they wanted to, there is channels out there I know they can look at and get the real problems, but they refuse to. They will look at the ones that are more tailored towards the ones where they're more reluctant to say how raw it is and how reluctant it is, so they can scapegoat past them real problems and talk about the little issues, you know, and paraphrase the comment. I know I've got comment section. Where's she putting comments that nice or that neutral from? That's not saying you have done this, blah, 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 blah. Like these are very selective comments she's even replying to. And it's just insulting to hear going through it and ourselves and knowing that we're not saying any of that. And it's just that, I don't even know. They're probably writing it to themselves. Like, if we'd never know.
For my daughter's EHCP, I was turned down straight away, even though we were turning up to A&E every couple of weeks for various issues. And the level of patronising behaviour that came out of the local authority was unbelievable. And I was phoning them up going, I think my daughter's going to die. And they're like, oh, well, you can call your GP. Like, I haven't tried that 15 times and we haven't been to A&E 8 times in the last 6 months or something. But the bottom line is it's inconvenient. Have to turn around and go, the system that we've created over the last 100, 130, 200 years isn't working. Because at the moment it's creating what they need, which is people to consume things. And then when you've got people turning around going, well, I've got a better way of doing that, and it doesn't cost an arm and a leg, then the people who are making the money then want the status quo to be maintained because that's what puts money in their pockets.
Yeah. And we're not talking, when you're talking about that, that's millions. You're talking like, that's why it's very, very corporate, especially schools are run like businesses and stuff like that. There's a lot of money. And if you fund a school for grades and you put SEN included, they're not going to get the grades. How does the money come? And then what's the point of the school if they're not going to get money or financed if they're not looking at grades? So like, there's lots of different angles of why it all leads to finance and out of our hands when it comes to certain things as well with SEN, isn't it?
I think the bottom line is where people don't want to follow in government is the research is there. It is 100%. If you have adverse childhood experiences, you will end up with autoimmune diseases later on in life. It might take 10 years, it could take 30 years, but you will end up with something because your immune system has been dealing with your nervous system, trying to regulate for so long that eventually the two start talking to each other. And then one thing will set it off, and it's like the straw that breaks the camel's back. And before you know it, you've got a chronic illness or a chronic injury. And then if we do not solve the SEND crisis now, what we will have in 10, 15, 20 years is a generation of people who are chronically ill and injured and can't work and can't contribute the way that they say we should. Just because you haven't got a job doesn't mean that your life isn't worth living. And if somebody is profoundly disabled, I'm going to use that phrase. I'm trying to use my words carefully for once rather than just opening my mouth and changing feet. How dare somebody else say that their life isn't worth living and that, yes, it can be incredibly stressful living in that environment, helping somebody live when they are like that. But that doesn't mean that their life is worth any less than somebody who is a CEO or a teacher, a doctor, an admin assistant. All those different jobs, wide range of jobs. Just because somebody's not doing a desk job or does an outside job or whatever, their life is as important as the next person's, because ultimately we are all human beings. And yes, we have neurodivergence, but you would not have the world the way it is with the inventions, with the insight, with the sculptures, with the music, with the art, without somebody who is ultimately passionate about that subject. And what does it take to be passionate about that subject? Singular mind, that's the person that finds the key difference, the person that looks at that pattern recognition and goes, I can see a way forward through that. Whereas somebody else who isn't quite as able to see the pattern is not going to be able to do that. And we should not be looking at whether that means you have the right to an education or not.
No, that's brilliant. I think, do you know what? That's a really, really nice statement to wrap it up on, to be fair. That was I was zoned in. I was like, do you know what? This is a speech and a half. But no, it's true. That's amazing. I think, do you know what? Again, we just need to book another one in, really, because I think that there's not enough time in hours that we could just keep having regular ones. I think it's the only way forward. But no, it's been amazing to have you on again.